Christchurch Grammar School and Methodist Ladies College. It's lovely to have you on board for this presentation. My name is Cecile O'Connor. I'm the Communications Manager at the WA Marine Science Institution, WAMSI, and I have had the pleasure of speaking in the past to Dr. Iain Parnum, who does fascinating work on the sounds that you hear under the waves. Iain is the Senior Research Fellow and the Deputy Director of the Centre for Marine Science and Technology at Curtin University, and he does research, fieldwork and teaching in acoustic remote sensing of the marine environment, such as seafloor mapping, underwater soundscapes and the bioacoustics of marine mammals. It's a whole lot more than whales and dolphins, which you're about to hear. So it's a great pleasure to have Dr. Iain Parnum with us, and I'll hand over to you now, Iain. Thank you.
Thanks, Cecile, and thanks for everyone joining us there at Christchurch. Yes, as Cecile said, I'm Dr. Iain Parnum, and I'm a Senior Research Fellow with the Centre for Marine Science Technology at Curtin University. And today I'm going to talk to you about the underwater soundscapes of WA marine ecosystems, or at least some selected examples. Anyway, so just a little bit of overview of what I'm going to talk about today. I've been asked as part of these presentations to talk a bit about myself and my journey and how I got here. And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about sound, because it helps to understand a little bit about the physics of sound to actually get the most out of hearing the different examples I'm going to give of underwater soundscapes from two locations not all that far from us right now off the WA coast, one in the Perth Canyon, which you might have heard about, and one a little bit closer to the coast, Coburn Sound. So while I'm giving the presentation, when I give the lectures at here at Curtin, I sometimes give the students focus questions, so something to maybe to hang on to, where it's some of the areas that might not interest them so much. So you know, while you're watching it, I wonder if you probably know that sound and light and energy travel as waves, but do you know what makes them different? What different kind of waves they use to transmit energy? And do you know an animal that goes boing? Well, you're going to find out today, and so I'm wondering if you can work out which marine animal does that. There's another marine animal that has a sound which is affectionately called a bioduct, and I'm wondering if you can work out what makes something that people would describe as a bioduct. And what does snapping shrimp have in common with the seismic survey? Well, we're going to find out later on in this presentation. But first, a little bit about me. If you can't tell, I'm originally from the UK, and I spent most of my first half of my life there in the UK, and it's there where I got a first love of the coast and the marine environment. Here's me off the south coast of Wales in the early 80s, trying to learn how to surf. Probably didn't have the conditions that we get in Australia. I have visited Australia. I was fortunate to visit before I went to university, including in Perth. And I had an uncle teach at Guildford Grammar School. This is the classic tourist shop down south where you're between two oceans. And then I went to university and I did a degree in chemistry. I was interested in science. I wasn't necessarily sure exactly what I wanted to do, and I enjoyed my chemistry degree. But I came out of it with no photos, which is surprising. I look back and I can barely find a photo. But one memory I came out of is I liked science, but I don't necessarily want to work in a laboratory. And I had enough of putting on rubber gloves. And so I wanted to get out of the laboratory, but still do science. And so I do what a lot of people do when they're not sure. You go on a gap year. Including in Australia. This is me rafting down the Tully River, trying to work out what to do about life. And actually it was up in North Tropical Queensland that I realised I'd like to go into marine science. And so on my return to the UK, I did a master's in marine science at Bangor University, Wales, which was a great experience. It was quite an intensive taught master's, but we did a research component. And during that research component, I was introduced more to acoustics, particularly using acoustics to map the seafloor. After my master's, I realized that I'd like to do more acoustics and more seafloor mapping. and an opportunity came, and I was fortunate to be successful in doing a PhD in marine acoustics and seafloor mapping here at Curtin in the mid 2000s, and I finished that PhD in 2008. It was an amazing experience. I got to go around Australia. I got to map different parts of the coast, including the Great Barrier Reef. Sydney, there's a photo here from when we were doing some mapping in Sydney Harbour. And through that experience, and working with the group that I'm now, I really enjoyed working with acoustics and sound. And I was fortunate to stay on after my PhD, doing all sorts of aspects of acoustics. Some seafloor mapping. This is me working on a WAMSI project in the Kimberley when they were doing a program of work in the Kimberley. I was collaborating with some marine geologists, mapping some areas near the Sunday Islands, and that was very exciting. And now I've continued my journey here with the group, and I do a mixture of seafloor mapping and passive acoustics, and whatever really. I'm quite open to new marine technology, and so more recently I'm now a senior research scientist. I have my own PhD students, and this is me on the back of a boat in Coburn Sound, and you'll see the results of some of that work where we were studying and trying to understand the underwater soundscape of Coburn Sound. So that's me, and just to put in context, this is our research group, the Centre for Marine Science Technology. This is a kind of montage of past and present students and staff. There's me down there. I'm now also the Deputy Director for the group. We were established, well, it'll be 40 years next year, and our director, Christine Nerve, she's been with us for over 10 years. She's an amazing director, and we have a very healthy group of PhD students, active research going on. It's a great place for me to be, and others. We do a lot of work predominantly in underwater sound, but that constitutes lots of different things. Today I'm going to talk to you about underwater soundscapes, marine soundscapes. That overlaps with a lot of marine bioacoustics, but we have people who specialize on the acoustics and sounds produced by marine fauna. And as such, also we have researchers working on the hearing of marine fauna. We have people who really like their physics and maths, and so they get heavy into the modeling of trying to predict sound. I still do quite a bit of 3D mapping using acoustics. This is some of my work over from the Barrier Reef, over coral reefs. And more recently, we're into distributed acoustic sensing, which is turning underwater power cables into observing networks, which is pretty cutting edge stuff. And but a lot of our work is focused on looking at the impact of noise on marine fauna. So our group has a long history in underwater sound, in acoustics, and that's because sound is important in the marine environment. Anyone who goes snorkeling, you generally want to pick a good day with good visibility, because it's not enjoyable being in the marine environment when you really can't see far in front of you. But of course, for the inhabitants of the marine environment, that's a daily existence, and so the visual is less relied upon using your vision, and sound becomes a more necessary way of survival and communication, because you can't have good visibility all the time, and for 12 hours a day, of course, we're going to have no light at all. And as some of you have studied biology, you understand that all sorts of things happen at night, nocturnal activity, and so it is important that sound is used, because that's not inhibited by the amount of light present. And so sound is exploited in the marine environment by different marine fauna for navigation, for communication, for finding prey, and so on. And so that's why our group has had great success working in this area, because it continues to interests us, and new research questions arise. So if we're going to just talk about underwater sound, it's actually important that we understand what sound is. And you might be familiar with it, maybe more from music or from something else. What's in the sound waves is the vibration of particles that miraculously is turned into something meaningful by our ears. But if we look up a dictionary definition of sound, it's quite dry. But the kind of physics of it is it's a mechanical radiant energy that is transmitted by longitudinal pressure waves in a material media such as air, and the objective cause of hearing. That's quite a mouthful and quite a lot to. I want to kind of break down, because a lot of science is terminology. It can be quite confronting if you're given words and so on that you're not so familiar with. And so I just want to try and demystify it a little bit. What do we mean by mechanical radiant energy, longitudinal pressure waves? What does that mean? So one thing also to add is I might say acoustics, I might say sound. The science of sound is known as acoustics, and so generally the two terms are used interchangeably. So there's different there, although we think of waves, there is different types of waves. The one you might be most familiar with is something called a transverse wave, and that's because this is how electron magnetic energy travels. Like from the sun to where we are now. And a transverse wave means that the particles are effectively, let's say, moving up and down, almost like a Mexican wave in a stadium. Someone stands up and then the next person stands up, and so on and so on. That kind of propagates around the stadium. But the movement is perpendicular to the traveling, the direction the wave is traveling in a transverse wave. Sound actually travels in a different way to light. It doesn't. So light travels in a transverse wave. So the particles move perpendicularly to the direction of the wave, whereas sound moves in a longitudinal fashion. So it is moving back and forth. The particles are moving back and forth, and whereas in the same direction that the wave is traveling. So if we look at this nice animation here, if we have sound generated, that particles move back and forth, are excited, and but the actual particles don't continue to move, but the energy created by them in the form of a wave does travel forward. And one of the other important difference, electromagnetic kind of wave can travel through a vacuum like light, but a mechanical wave like sound needs some kind of medium, i.e. air, water, the seafloor, to be able to actually move. So those are the two kind of main differences. Both waves, light and sound, but they do have different differences, and those are them there. There are three kind of principal properties of sound. I'm going to concentrate the three main important ones, especially when we work in the underwater domain. We're principally interested first how fast sound travels. We're also interested in how loud sound is. And we're also very interested normally in what the frequency of sound, sometimes referred to as the pitch of the sound wave, and so on. So I'm just going to spend a second just to break those down a little bit more. So the speed of sound. So just to understand, going back to that diagram where we have the wave traveling in that from on the screen there from left to right. The speed the particles are moving back and forth has a name. It's called the sound particle velocity, but we're normally more interested in the speed the wave is moving down, and that's called the sound speed, and normally given in meters per second. And the interesting thing about sound speed is quicker in water than compared to air, more than 4 times quicker, and then it's quicker still in the seafloor. So if you have an underwater earthquake, the sound traveling through the seafloor will arrive at a destination before the sound that's traveled through the water. It also means it helps in the exploitation of sound for marine animals, or even for ourselves if we want to go and use, say, echo sounders and sonar systems that we have. That sound travels so quickly through the water, it's an efficient means to transmit energy, and thereby we can get information about what's around us quite quickly. So that's the speed of sound. So trying to understand how loud sound is when we measure underwater sound. So say we've got something making noise underwater, like a whale. maybe it's saying the equivalent in whale speak of hello. And as we've seen from our diagram up there, that will travel through the water quite efficiently. And then if we want to measure it, we'll put in a hydrophone, which is an underwater microphone. And what the underwater microphone, the hydrophone, does is it's called a transducer, because it converts the sound into an electrical signal. And from that electrical signal, we can have this plot of pressure, which is converted from the volts of the electrical signal. And so we get a plot a bit like this, where we have this oscillating signal about 0 back and forth. But through a hydrophone, we can get this in terms of sound pressure. So we have a time series of the recorded sound pressure. And from the amplitude of this pressure signal, we can calculate the sound pressure levels, and that's in decibels, and that's a logarithmic scale, which tells you how loud that sound is. But the other interesting, useful bit of information when you're listening to sound is the frequency, knowing if something's rather bassy or high pitched. That's the frequency, and we can derive the frequency from this same time signal, but we need to use some maths, which we're going to talk about. So the frequency relates to the distance between the different peaks, the wave peaks in the signal. So the wave period relates to the frequency. It's the inverse. The frequency is the inverse of the wave period. The frequency is cycles per second, and so from the wave period we can get the frequency. So this is a nice example of, a simple signal, but of course in the marine environment we rarely get these. So in reality, this is something we're normally more dealing with, and so we have an actual whale, not a caricature of one, and we have a sound, and we record it, and it doesn't look like a normal signal. So I'm just going to try and play this, and let's see if this works. I'll play it one more time. Now, I wonder if anyone is good at recognizing their whales, or can. This is a photo of that whale making that sound. Now, it's quite a distinctive. This is referred to. You have to come up with descriptions for these sounds, and someone has described this as a boing sound, and it's only made by this animal. And when you record the signal, yes, when you play it back, you can distinguish it. But when you look at this time series, you would have to be, quite have a complex brain to be able to interpret this time series as making that signal. And that's where the frequency component is very useful for understanding it. So how do we get that frequency component as well as the amplitude? So what is the frequency? Well, what we need to do, so we'll keep boing, is we take that signal and we use something invented by a French mathematician called a Fourier transform, and that converts things from the time domain into the frequency domain, and you end up with this color plot here called a spectrogram. And the spectrogram colors areas on how loud they are. So on this color axis, the dark colors are loud and the light colors are quiet. And the frequency is now on the y-axis, and the time is on the x-axis along the bottom. I'll just grab the laser pointer if that's going to help here. So yeah, we've still got time along the bottom here. And then on the y-axis, we've got frequency increasing. So low frequency is those bassy, kind of tends towards a bass sound. And the higher in frequency, the more high-pitched the sound. Now, if we look at this plot now, we can see the different harmonics of that different sound signal. And so when we hear the boing sound, we can really kind of visualize. So when actually we see the spectrogram, we actually sometimes don't even need to hear the sound to first recognize. Obviously, it's good to play it as well. And so from the combination of listening to it and looking at the spectrogram, experience tells us that we know this is a common minke whale that makes this boing sound. So now you know what a spectrogram is. I'm now going to introduce you to a long-term spectrogram. So the one we saw on the previous page was only over a few seconds. Now, what we do as a group is we record sound over months and between years. And sometimes we want to visualize the seasonal patterns and the big picture. And so we still create a spectrogram, but our x-axis, instead of being seconds, it's days. So here we got almost the entire month of September shown in the spectrogram, where on the x-axis we've got a day, and in fact each tick is a day. So here's the 3rd of September 2012, right up to the end of September on the end of the plot. Still have frequency as a y-axis, and then the color here, the color axis, the reds, that means it's a loud noise, and then going down to the quietest noise is down blue. And even looking at this quite coarse temporal resolution data, we can actually start to tease out different parts of the soundscape. And this is an example of a recording from the Perth Canyon, where when we zoom in and listen on a noise, we know there's periods of different whales, like fin whales, blue whales, but also we get other sorts of sound like ship noise, and we get wind and rain. And so we can generally classify the soundscape into 3 main elements, something called geophony, which is your kind of wind, rain, earthquakes, so kind of physical mechanisms that make sounds. And then probably for some of us, the most interesting, the biophony, which is whales, dolphins, fish, crustaceans. And finally, the anthropophony, so anthropogenic source of noise, and predominantly a lot of these are ships, but we get things like seismic surveys and other sources of anthropogenic noise. So we can start to break this picture up into the different parts of the geophony. So there's some examples. Wind and rain is normally what we call in the mid frequencies up here. Biophony, the great whales, a lot of the baleen whales make low frequency sound. They're large animals capable of making low frequency noises. And then things like vessels can make noise over several frequencies, but they generally make what they call a more broadband sound, which means it covers various frequencies in range and actually sometimes can mask some of these other signals. So those are 3 kind of main components of a soundscape, particularly in the marine domain. So that data came from the Perth Canyon, and it was predominantly collected through efforts of my colleague Rob Macaulay. And so what Rob would do is he would get on a boat and it would be driven out into the canyon. So this is us over in Perth here, and so you'd go past Rottnest, another 19 kilometers west of Rottnest, and not in the deepest part of the canyon, but still at several hundred meters depth. There was an acoustic observatory established for a number of years, and that's because the canyon has a lot of interesting things going on. It's an area where you find whales, but it's also maybe you might encounter other things from vessels to possibly even submarines, considering we have a submarine base stationed here. So there's a lot of interest in the canyon, and we think that the waters are nutrient rich because of the oceanography interacting with the canyon can create kind of some upwelling and increase in the productivity in the area, which of course is good for supporting marine life, including great whales. So when he drives out to the middle of the canyon, he throws in a sound recorder, and but he doesn't just throw in the sound recorder. He has a series of ropes. So this is the sound recorder down here. This is a diagram of what's down on the seafloor. So this is on the seafloor bottom, maybe between 400 and 480 meters, and then a series of ropes along the ground. And then we have an acoustic release and nothing at the surface. We find that's easier and less likely that someone's going to go and pull it up. But when we are ready to pull up this sound recorder and exchange it for another one, is that using another kind of acoustic device, we use a modem that will tell this release to let go of a weight, and then the buoys will come to the surface and the equipment can be retrieved. So that's the diagram. And actually, when you drive to the boat, this is kind of, it's a lot of rope and a lot of equipment on the back of a ute and then on the boat. And the important instrument is the sound recorder. which is made up of a hydrophone. I don't know if you can see on the video, this is kind of what a hydrophone looks like here, and inside it is a special kind of ceramics that convert sound into electrical signal. But a hydrophone's not enough when you're going to deploy this and want to autonomously record sound for several months. You actually need a recorder, and here is a type of recorder. It's a slightly different model than used in the Perth Sound, and again, it has a hydrophone at the top, but like most electronics, it also requires a lot of batteries. So this hydrophone has a lot of required for batteries, and of course the electronics and SD cards to record the data, and usually something called a preamp, because underwater sound needs some amplification at the source for the best quality recordings. So returning to the actual sound itself and those different components, we're now going to take a moment. I could spend all day, dissecting the different geophony, biphony, and antiphony. But for you, I think we're going to focus on what I feel is probably the most interesting bit, which is the biphony. We're going to focus mainly on some of these great whales that go and utilize and call the Perth Canyon home for certain periods of the year. So one of the most infamous to use the Perth Canyon is blue whales on their migration. And they produce some tonal sounds. So tone means it's predominantly at one frequency. And they will, though, have harmonics, which is where when you produce a sound, and those who do music know that they can produce harmonics, which are kind of related to that fundamental frequency of the sound that you produced. And they make wonderful pictures on the spectrogram. So this is a blue whale song. I'm going to play part of Blue Whale song I'm going to play for you. And so again, we've got this spectrogram, we've got time on the x-axis and frequency on the y-axis, and the color red, that's the areas of loudness. Now, the thing with human hearing frequency, the quoted kind of textbook is that humans are designed to be able to hear between, say, 20 hertz, which is down here, and 20,000 hertz. But the reality is, and especially the older you get, that it's very hard to hear low frequency sound, referred to as infrasound, as well as hearing high frequency sound, which is called ultrasonic sound. So in this instance, because it's hard to, we wouldn't be able to hear otherwise, I actually have we have increased the speed of the playback so that we're able to, it's now in our hearing range. So it's slightly fortified, but it allows us to appreciate kind of how these sounds sound like. So I'm going to press it play now. Oh, that did not work. So what you heard there was, 180 seconds reduced to 18, and that's from a pygmy blue whale. I like how they're called pygmy. It makes them sound small when they're ginormous. And they, by having the recorders and recording the soundscape from the Perth Canyon, it's a wonderfully efficient way to monitor the presence of whales like this. And so by having the recording there, and because we know this distinctive sounds that is made by a blue whale and other sounds that we know that we have the presence of blue whales in the canyon from November to June, but they have a particular peak where they're making a lot more noise between March and June. Okay, so it's a great monitoring tool. Also with them are probably the show-offs of the whale world, the humpbacks. They have a larger repertoire. Blue whales predominantly make quite low frequency sound. Humpbacks, they are actually, I can make low frequency sound, but I can also make high frequency sound. I can make tones, I can make pulse sounds, and I can make sounds that change in frequency. And so it's much more complex. And the males are associated with singing songs for hours at a time. And there's been interesting work done on the cultural evolution of song, where researchers have found that songs sung by whales are generally sung only for maybe a couple of seasons during their migration, but then a distant population further in the ocean actually hears some of that sound and takes on a bit of that song, which is really interesting stuff, insight into the ecology of these animals. So from the monitoring in the Perth Canyon, we can see from the acoustics, the acoustic monitoring, that we've got presence in the Perth Canyon from July to late October. There is a suggestion there's two peaks in the detections that we see. One associated with the northern migration, when they're generally on their way, the females are on their way to calve their animals, and then on the southern migration when they're back to Antarctica to feed over the winter time. So I'm just going to play you a bit of a humpback song. I think he's finished. Anyway, so that's humpbacks. We also have other whales, probably less heard of. The fin whale, which is, I think, considered some full adults are the second largest whales after blue whales. They don't make a long range, different like the they're not like the humpbacks. They just make a simple kind of downsweep. A downsweep refers to the direction of the change in frequency, so it starts high and then goes low. But this is quite low frequency, and I haven't had the chance to speed this up. So this will be a test. I'll play a little bit of this to see if anyone thinks their hearing is good enough to hear this low. I think the recording's. Okay. All right, while that plays, I'll just let you know that, again, using the acoustic data from the underwater soundscape, we can compare these sounds with other regions, and this has been hypothesized that they're making similar sounds to a population found in eastern Antarctic. And we think these sounds that we're recording in the canyon are fin whales on its northern migration in June to August. We could keep going, and animals. I'm gonna finish with probably my favorite, if hopefully if it works. And it's another minke whale, but it's a different one. It's an Antarctic minke whale, and this has an interesting history because some years ago, submariners heard a sound, and they found it very strange. They didn't think it was from anything anthropogenic. And they termed it bioduck because you could only really name it what it sounds like. And so they would register when they heard bioduct. And then years later, through correlating observations, that it's now being attributed to the Antarctic minke whale. So the Antarctic minke whale is the so-called producer of the bioduct sound in Perth Canyon. And through that, we know that we can detect it July and August in the Perth Canyon. So I'm going to play you some bioduct. Okay. So moving on, that's me. I'm going to mention one anthropogenic noise in the canyon, only because it's it kind of differs from what you would maybe hear in Coburn Sound, which we'll switch to in a second, and that's air guns. Now, you're more likely to hear air guns off the northwest of Australia than you are in the canyon, but they were detected because sound travels quite a far distances because of how efficiently it moves through water. And seismic air guns are used for exploration below the seafloor, and they do this through generating a large air bubble through an air compressor. And when the bubble collapses, it generates a large pressure wave, and this wave is then travels down through the seafloor, and when it bounces back up, they use hydrophones again to measure the response from the seafloor, and through that they're able to reconstruct what's happening below the seafloor for exploration. In this instance, these signals didn't really contribute to the over soundscape, but it's an excuse to show you what an air gun looks like when captured on a slow motion camera. So there on the top left, you'll see a couple of air guns, and you'll see soon an air bubble produced by one. And then when the bubble collapses, that produces the pressure wave. Large pressure wave, and it generates this kind of signal seen here on the right. So I just want you to keep that in mind when we talk about Coburn sound, and how it's interesting how we have created something using that kind of technique. So I'm going to switch now from the deep offshore now to closer to the coastal region and Coburn sound. And through a program arranged by WAMSI with Westport that was funded, program, the WAMSI Westport Marine Science Program. And the idea of the program is designed to fill knowledge gaps relating to the Coburn Sound region. It's been a really fascinating program where there's been different groups looking at every aspect of the marine environment in Coburn Sound, everything from seafloor habitats to fisheries to social use of the sound. Our responsibility is to look at the underwater soundscape, because that's what our group focuses on, but we talk to the other groups working particularly in working with the marine fauna, particularly the apex species and so on, because there's a relationship there, as you've seen. So what we did through this really nice funded bit of work from the WAMSI Westport Marine Science Program is we put out actually 9 sound recorders, and we've got over 12 months worth of data. So we were interested in the temporal and the spatial variation in the soundscape around Coburn Sound. And so you can see those 9 locations dotted around. So for those who don't know, Coburn Sound is this area off Perth coast between, say, Garden Island and Kwinana and Rockingham. But sometimes, you know, it expands the definition of where you decide Coburn Sound stops, but you have areas like Owen Anchorage near Coogee and so on. And then you've got Karnak Island, where you've got the sea lions. And then further down, of course, you're connected close to shoalwater, where we know a lot of things like penguins. And so, yeah, really interesting area, Coburn Sound. And so we were interested to see the soundscape of this region. And what we found is, again, a variety of different geophony and biophony. The geophony is very similar to as you can imagine, to Perth Canyon, dominated by wind and waves. But the anthropony, we had vessels like we do in Perth Canyon, but we also had pile driving, because it's an area of coast that is developing, and it was just pile driving actually from, we could hear that was going on in Garden Island, and where one of our recorders was. But the biophony is very different. We get a mixture of snapping shrimp, fish, and dolphins in Coburn Sound, and that's what we are hearing. So just to go through some of those biophony now. Snapping shrimp, sometimes called pistol shrimp, are small animals. You can see from this scale, from this wonderful photo here, that they're very small and they have a rather large claw. And through this sound, when enough of them are gathered together, it makes quite a noise. In fact, one of the dominant sounds in Coburn Sound above 1 kilohertz was snapping shrimp. And some sites, like the one I'm going to show you up here, had a diurnal pattern, which means there was a trend within the day where we actually had snapping shrimps louder at night than the day. And so you can see this where we've got this long-term spectrogram where we've got just over a week of data in October. And the frequency here, if you see this area of higher sound here during the night, so this is 12 midday, so you can see higher sound here, and then it's slightly quieter, and then it increases again, and then quieter, and then increases. And so that was really interesting to see. Snapping shrimp also in other parts of the world shows some association with temperature and how loud they snap due to temperature. And we definitely found in one site it looked like there was that association. And so it'll be interesting to see, particularly in the lens of climate change, you know, how that will affect snapping shrimp and noise they make. Certainly, for some submariners, they're a bit of a nuisance because they create this real broadband loud noise that can get in the way of communication for kind of their operations. But I'm going to play you some snapping shrimp sound and see. I think. Okay, some people say it sounds like frying bacon. There's also all sorts of other comparison. But what I find interesting about snapping shrimp is how that noise is made. It's not the impact of the claw hitting the other claw, but the pistol shrimp, it gets its name, snapping shrimp, sometimes called pistol shrimp, because what it's doing by quickly closing its claw is it's generating a big air bubble. And when that air bubble collapses, it actually is used to stun prey, like a little, so that's its pistol, it's an air pistol. And it's interesting that it's very similar to the way a seismic survey exploits air guns to be able to see below the seafloor. Pistol shrimp generates this pressure wave from creating a large air bubble that collapses and then stuns its prey. And so I find it interesting we have the biology in snapping shrimp being imitated by the search and exploration of the seas through anthropogenic kind of created means through an air gun. So I find this interesting. This is some really cool slow-mo video of a snapping shrimp, and you can see when it closes its claw, you can see that from the top and the bottom, you can see the air bubble being created, and then when it collapses, you can see that pressure wave, and you can imagine how that's able to stun prey. Snapping shrimp noise. The other kind of sounds that we were able to hear through Coburn Sound were fish choruses. We do get a fish chorus in the Perth Canyon. That's at about 2000 hertz. We're not absolutely certain on the identity of that fish. Whereas the one in the Coburn Sound, we haven't completely identified, but we have a good idea as acoustic detectives. So we heard lots of fish noises around Coburn Sound, and then occasionally what happens at sunset is the fish get together and they all make a noise, and it's called a chorus. And most of these choruses are generally heard at sunset, not all of them, but this one definitely was seen at sunset. So when I look at the average spectrogram here on the top left here, I see that near sunset, I see an increase in noise. And when I go and look at the noise in the spectrogram and play the sound, I know that's a sound that's made by a fish. It's not made by a vessel. It's not made by a dolphin. It's not snapping shrimp. It's very much a fish noise. And it's a fish noise that has very similar characteristics, both in its spectrogram and the way it sounds to mulloway fish that we've recorded. A colleague of mine called Mars Parsons, who studied mulloway sounds, and these look very similar. So although we don't have a direct correlation with the visual, we think this is either mulloway or a fish that's very similar to mulloway in the sound. I'm gonna try and play a mulloway sound of what we think is a mulloway in the Coburn Sound. This is what. that's not playing for me. It might be one I have to play at the end. I apologize for that. But it kind of makes a bar, 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 bar sound, because like most fish generate their sound by manipulating their air bladder back and forth, like a bit like a drum. And so it has that very simplistic kind of noise, but they're quite amazing how they can manipulate it to make these sounds sound quite interesting. And the final biophony I'll mention, of course, is dolphins, which we don't hear so much in the canyon, particularly the bottlenose ones. They're kind of a coastal creature. And as mentioned in one of the other WAMSI themes, studying Cockburn Sound, Delphine at Murdoch University has been studying them. And so we've been collaborating together with letting her know when and where we're hearing dolphin sounds in the Cockburn Sound. And our dolphin sounds are quite easy to detect. They make a range of sounds. Echolocation clicks are used for navigation, and particularly for targeting on prey. So bats the same. So dolphins, they fire off a broadband short click to try and range in on something they want to eat. They make buzzes, which is where I think the echolocation clicks are manipulated in a way to make a kind of buzz sound, and whistles, which are more of a social sound to communicate between each other. And the dolphin sounds we detected were very similar to Indo-Pacific bottlenose dolphins that we recorded in Fremantle Inner Harbour before. So here's the sound from one of the recordings of Cockburn Sound, where it has a range of those echolocation clicks, buzzes and whistles. So those are dolphins. We've still got lots of work to do in this area that we'd like to do more with the data. We know they're there, and so we can look at some seasonal patterns. We generally found them all year round, all around the sound. We also detected what they call signature whistles, where it's hypothesized that certain dolphins individuals have a signature whistle, which so that you know that's that individual. And we certainly recorded whistles which were then repeated later that look very similar to each other. And this is something we would like to explore more. We also want to look at the relationship between, say, the fish noises that you can see in the bottom right here in this spectrogram, and those we know dolphins were present at the same time. So there's a lot more we would like to do with the data in Cockburn Sound, but at the moment we have a great data set in the project. And just finally, just to sum up the tale of the two underwater soundscapes. So the geophony is very similar, which is to be expected. We perhaps get a bit more kind of wave action in Cockburn Sound, and we hear more of the odd earthquake in Perth Canyon, which I didn't get a chance to play you. But Perth Canyon, it's where the biophony is different. The Perth Canyon very much home to great whales, everything from pygmy blue whales, humpbacks, fins, minke whales. And whereas in Cockburn Sound, we have this cacophony of snapping shrimp, fish choruses, and of course the occasional dolphin making whistles, clicks, and buzzes. And we both certainly hear a lot of ship noise in both data sets, but because we're near the coast, we also hear other machinery and pile driving noise going on in Cockburn Sound. Whereas offshore in the canyon, we do hear the occasional seismic survey. Just also want to let you know about a couple of resources. So all of that data collected from the Perth Canyon, that's available to download and view through the IMOS program. And there's some web links there that you can get where you can go and look at those long-term spectrograms. And probably the most useful link is Christine and others collected a catalogue of noises made by marine mammals, and it's online and free, available from our website, where you can go and click on a different marine mammal, and it will play you a recorded sound to let you know what sounds are made by that animal. So a real useful catalogue, especially even for ourselves when we're going through sound. If we're not quite sure what it is, it can be useful when we have to play acoustic detective.